What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 10 cards of 2020. You know, given everything that occurred this year that no one foresaw all the way back at the beginning of the year, Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually released some incredibly powerful cards, and they didn't really get to see fleshed out in the greater competitive landscape as they otherwise would have. And so I wanted to just take a moment and really just highlight some of the best cards from the past year, like I do towards the end of every year, because I think it's really just time to go back, take a look at really how far we've come over the year and just acknowledge how powerful some of these cards truly are. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So starting off at number 10, I actually have an archetype more than a specific card, and it'll make more sense why that is, and I have a few of these scattered throughout the video. But for number 10, we have Virtual World. You know, Virtual World is an archetype that a lot of people really pushed to the side when it was first released in the OCG and then subsequently here in the TCG, but it turns out when your deck can consistently make True King of all Calamities turn after turn, your opponent really just can't deal with it, and just like that, you have a solid competitive contender. Virtual World's really cool because it really does something unique that not other Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards have done before, and I think it definitely deserves some special acknowledgement for that. Now, I'm recording this video before the December ban list, so if this video happens to drop after the ban list for some reason or another, I just want to put that on the record that, you know, maybe Calamities will get banned, who knows. But the thing is, I think it's cool to see where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is still able to explore some interesting areas of card design that it hasn't done previously, and I really hope that Yu-Gi-Oh! Continues to do that as we move forward into the future. So for number 10, we have Virtual World. Coming in at number 9, we actually have an individual card this time. It's actually another card that was released in Phantom Rage, and oh man, is it a good one. It is Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. Zeus, when I first read this card, I was absolutely mind blown at how powerful this card is. It sends all other cards on the field to the graveyard. You can use it multiple times in a turn. You can use it multiple times in a chain. This card was able to revitalize Xyz focused strategies because now there's a payoff for playing Xyz based decks that really didn't exist before, and when you go back to the Xyz era, obviously that was the way to play, but as we've introduced pendulums and links, Xyz had kind of fallen by the wayside, but now decks are clamoring for ways to be able to go into a card like Zeus because the payoff is there to do so. This card is format warping. It has pushed Zodiac back into competitive contention. There are plenty of decks that can actually take advantage of Zeus, and I don't think this card's going anywhere anytime soon, and it's definitely a terror of the format. Just keep in mind, we're on slot number 9, and Zeus is slot number 9. So this is the floor. How high can this ceiling get? You'll have to see, but Zeus is coming in at number 9. But coming in at number 8, we have another archetype, of course, and this is an archetype that became rather prolific after its release in Rise of the Duelist, and that archetype is, of course, Dogmatica. Dogmatica is such an awesome archetype in my eyes because it's very similar to Invoke, that it is able to be splashed into a multitude of different decks. I also like that it brings something unique to the table and is able to use the extra deck as a resource in a way that really wasn't seen before. There were a few cards that did things like Dogmatica does, but really there wasn't an archetype centralized around it, and it seemed at first to be this sort of anti-meta sort of strategy, but it can be spliced in a myriad of other different decks, and the fact that the cards aren't rather precluding and allow you to synergize them with other strategies is what makes the archetype so powerful. I mean, Ecclesia just by itself represents so many negations, and then even beyond that, you're able to just generate so much card advantage. It really reminds me of the old school days of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I really do miss that, especially since I've been going on this kick with the progression series and the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! As of late, but that of course is for another video. I remember when I first read the Dogmatica cards when they were released in the OCG, and you know when you get that feeling when you read cards that you know that they're going to be competitive staples for several months? That was the feeling I got from this deck. It's still receiving support. I can't wait to see what other powerful cards it gets in the future, because if this is the first few waves of support, I mean, the sky's the limit with this archetype. So Dogmatica is coming in at number 8. But coming in at number 7, oh boy, we have another single card once again, and it's a very terrifying one That card is Redeyes Dark Dragoon. Now, this is a bit of an interesting pick because in the OCG, Redeyes Dark Dragoon has actually been banned because it is one of the most powerful cards ever created. But here in the TCG, it didn't have that same type of effect. And the reason is solely just because of power creep and how much more broken some of the archetypes here are relatively in our respective format. But even with that being the case, Dragoon, I feel, definitely deserves a spot on the top 10 cards of 2020. You have to keep in mind, we're only going based off of cards that were released in 2020. And when you just read Dragoon, I mean, talk about one of, if not the most powerful boss monster in existence. It is a boss monster with 3,000 attack, has protection from targeting and destruction, can pop not one, but two monsters for the most part. Everyone's always going to be popping for two in most instances. It's able to gain attack points that it does not go back down during the end phase or anything. It has a built-in negation on top of that, and not to mention, it is splashable in nearly every single deck that you can play in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. As long as your deck can support playing Verte Anaconda and you just slam in a Dark Magician and Redeyes Black Dragon into your deck, you're going to be set to go, and you are going to have access to one of the most broken cards ever created. It's truly astonishing to me how Redeyes Dark Dragoon is not at the top tables of competitive play right now, and that's just because power creep is just so out of control that all these other decks are just better and don't really need to access Dragoon. But Dragoon has raised the ceiling for some of these other decks that really weren't able to keep up and compete as much anymore, and allow them to actually maybe move up into rogue contention, maybe tier 2. And the thing is, we have a ban list right around the corner, and when that list comes out, there's a chance that all the best decks can just get completely nuked, and Redeyes Dark Dragoon, if it goes unchecked, will be running rampant. We'll have to see what happens, but this card is format warping. We already saw it happen, and people know that this card is powerful. We just have to wait to see what happens, but it's no surprise that Redeyes Dark Dragoon comes in at number 7. Now, coming in at number 6, we have yet another archetype, and I think this might be the only card or set of cards, rather, featured from Toon Chaos specifically. And I'm not talking about the tunes, don't get too excited. I'm, of course, talking about Infernoble Knight. Infernoble Knight has been one of the strongest decks throughout 2020, and it has consistently proven why that is the case. Warriors have always been one of the most highly supported archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Infernoble Knight's no exception. People wanted Noble Knight to be good for quite some time. It really just took until their fire counterparts were released for that to be the case. This deck is one of the strongest combo decks of all time and is able to assemble multiple negation boards while simultaneously being able to play through multiple forms of interaction. And if that weren't enough, it's able to do unfair things in tandem with a card like Smoke Grenade of the Thief, which was a card that has just been begging to be abused for years on end. And so here we are, people are clamoring for the card to get banned, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Infernoble is still a very solid deck, even with the removal of Smoke Grenade. You even have a card like Immortal Phoenix Gearfried, which is just an incredible boss monster for any warrior-based deck, so what more could you really ask for? This is a deck that combo players love to clamor over, and it's no surprise that it made it onto this list, so Infernoble Knights are coming in at number 6. But now it's time for number 5. Can you believe we're already halfway through the video? It's crazy summarizing one entire year of Yu-Gi-Oh's history into a single video, but man, we're going to be going all the way back to the beginning for this one, because this is a card that when people first played it, they couldn't believe a card this powerful had been printed, and that card is Lightning Storm. Yes, Lightning Storm is probably to this day one of the most powerful normal spell cards ever printed, being able to either wipe all of your opponent's monsters or their entire back row, and all that matters is that you have no cards face up on your field. That's perfectly fine, and this is a card that people were in awe when they first got their hands on. This card still demands an outrageously high price tag. Hopefully it gets reprinted in 2021, and let's be honest, it's going to be, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this has to be one of the strongest cards of the year. This card just allows you to get back into a game where you have no right to be getting back into it. It's crazy that a card like this is allowed to exist, but when you look at the grand context of Yu-Gi-Oh! In general, and when so many cards have like protection from destruction or are able to negate things like a spell card, it actually is kind of rather fair in some instances. It does destroy, it doesn't like banish the cards like something like Evenly Matched did, and Evenly Matched is still also heavily played, just format dependent. I think Lightning Storm is going to leave a lasting legacy in Yu-Gi-Oh! And we'll probably see both main and side deck play for the next several years. But coming in at number 4, we have have another archetype, and this was when Yu-Gi-Oh! Really started to transition from 2019 to 2020, because people were really looking for a shakeup, and Secret Slayers definitely delivered, because that archetype is Eldritch. Yes, this zombie archetype is a force to be reckoned with and still sees competitive play to this very day. You guys have to remember, back when this deck was first released, people thought Eldritch was the best deck of the format until a little bit later on, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But Eldritch is just one of the strongest control decks, one of the most recursive, and is just the deck that does not quit. It is almost impossible for a deck like Eldritch to lose advantage, because every card effectively replaces itself. Golden Lord is able to get itself back from the graveyard seemingly an infinite number of times. And what's nice about the Eldritch cards is, yes, while they do have some restrictive clauses on them, like only being able to attack with zombie monsters, or you can always special summon zombie monsters for the rest of the turn after using a certain effect, you can kind of work around that in a lot of instances, and once again splash Eldritch with a myriad of other archetypes. This really raises the ceiling on what the deck can do, and we have seen variant after variant of Eldritch and continuously evolve over the months. We've had just pure Eldritch, we've had invoked Eldritch, we've had synchro Eldritch, now we have dogmatica Eldritch, Zodiac Eldritch. Who knows where Eldritch is going to be a year or two from now, but I really love the design. I really think this is just an archetype that's going to be around for several years unless they really hit some of the key cards, but it's an archetype that is relatively fair in the grand scheme of things. I think maybe synchro Eldritch was a little bit out of hand, but nonetheless, I think this archetype is fantastic. This was a welcome way to really just shake up the game, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed it. So Eldritch is coming in at number 4. Only 3 cards remain. Man, it is getting incredibly difficult to narrow down this list because there are so many viable contenders, but for number 3, we have one of the most incredibly broken Link monsters of all time, and it's banned in the OCG, and so maybe we'll see that happen here in the TCG. That card is Link Cross. Just when you think Konami couldn't release any more broken Link monsters, they come out with this card. And yeah, this is one of the most broken Link monsters ever printed in this game. Link Cross is so incredibly powerful, one of the strongest extenders of all time, allowing you to make tokens and then go into something like Martial Metal Marcher, which interestingly enough came out 2 years ago and saw little to no play. So anyone who might just be playing now might be shocked to think that, but now it's become a mainstay in combo decks because it typically results in you getting an either extra negation or just pushing forward to just generate even more advantage in whatever it is that your combo deck does. This is one of the best enablers that this game has ever seen, and again, there's a reason this card is banned in the OCG. It's because token production in Yu-Gi-Oh! While Link monsters exist is going to be abused in some way or another, so it's so hard to justify allowing you to get free Link monsters onto the field. Look how many other token producing cards have fallen to the ban list, and this card is still allowed to be played. I don't think so. This card is so not okay. I hope it gets banned, but it has to be on the list. It would be a travesty if it didn't make it, and so that's why Link Cross is coming in at number 3. But coming in at number 2, if you guys have been paying attention to the direction of this video and how we've been measuring the power level of cards, you're gonna know what's going to be in this slot. It is another archetype, and if you thought Eldritch was good, this archetype definitely took it to another level. Another Secret Slayers archetype being Adamant Painter. There is no way we could have done a list covering the top 10 cards, or I guess cards and archetypes, without talking about Adamant Painter. Talk about shaking up the meta. Adamant Painter was just dominating the format for 4 to 6 months of 2020 because this deck was nearly unbeatable. Adamant Painter is just incredibly overpowered while Block Dragon was legal because this deck was able to play through almost anything. It was able to play around cards like Nibiru, which was crazy, Nibiru being one of the biggest board equalizers, and Adamant Painter just completely scoffed it off because when you have an archetype that's able to produce negations right off the top of your deck like Quackimiru Guardian, or you're able to assemble your board and negations before Nibiru can even be online, that's just insane. Adamant Painter really made people rethink how they have to combat combo decks because we had never really seen a combo deck like this before. And what's interesting about Adamant Painter is that we really didn't have much foresight sight into how powerful this deck truly was. Usually we'll look to the OCG and see how those decks translate here into the TCG, because more often than not that is the case, but for a myriad of different reasons that just didn't happen. Obviously they have max C at 3, so maybe combo's a little bit harder to justify, but nonetheless this deck was engineered perfectly by some of the game's best players and was the best deck definitively of the format for several months. No question. Even when players started to figure out how to beat the deck, it still sometimes wasn't enough just because of the sheer amount of raw aggression and extenders the deck has at its disposal, and it was so difficult for people to play against it that a lot of people got really frustrated at the time, and you know when a deck does that, it's going to leave a lasting legacy. Hell, Black Dragon got banned and people still figured out a way to play it. Unsurprisingly, it's a little bit more glass cannon now, but even to this day, people are still playing it because they love the deck that much, and so that's why we had to put Adamant Painter towards the top of this list, but that isn't number one. So what could number one possibly be? If you've been paying attention to modern Yu-Gi-Oh! At all throughout 2020, then you know exactly what the number one slot is dedicated to. Countless monsters have fallen to the axe of the ban list and have been sacrificed for this card's sins, and I think the unfortunate thing is, I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon, but for the number one card of 2020, it is without a doubt Kristron, Halky, Fibrax. When we first saw this card in the OCG for the years to come, we were terrified here in the TCG because we knew the power level that this card had. There have been multiple tuner monsters that have been banned just because of this card's existence, even though this card is the problem. Now, what's interesting at this specific point in time is that while Halky Fibrax is immeasurably powerful, it isn't being played a whole lot. The combo decks obviously still want to play it, but other decks that are maybe more control-oriented don't need to have access to it, but this card enables a lot even for lower tier decks as well and allow them to do some unfair things that they would normally not have access to. This card is unmatched and there is no other way to put it. There are multiple other cards on the ban list that share this card's power level, and I still think this card is stronger than those, yet this card is still able to roam free. I'll be very interested to watch Halky Fibrax's history as we move into 2021. Kristron Halky Fibrax is definitively, without question, the number one card released in 2020. So guys, that's gonna wrap up the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about your top picks for cards released for Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2020. I'd really love to hear your thoughts because I had so many cards on my list, it was so difficult to narrow it down. I might even go ahead and do a runner-up video because I still have like 10 to 20 other contenders that could have easily made their way onto this list, and I want to talk about some of those more individual cards in depth as well, so I think you guys might really like to see that. Be sure to let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.